I will be presenting as the first one, talking about Plymouth Hope. So myself, I'm David Feindouno. I'm the founder and chair of Plymouth Hope, of course, based in Plymouth. I arrived in the city in Plymouth in 2008 as an asylum seeker. So football fanatic, football fan, always played football in my life. Arrived in the city, obviously, as maybe some of you may know, isolation is an issue for asylum seekers. I didn't know, well, having lived in London and Swansea, it was a little bit difficult to be accepted. To obviously, we wanted to do something to keep asylum seekers busy. So that's how the idea to start football activities came about. So today is just going to be sharing a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of a marathon, but hopefully you can have time to ask questions because I need to run through 11 years of history quickly. But mainly we'll be focusing on our Plymouth Hope Festival, which has been really an essential part of Refugee Week in the city. For the last 10 years, the Plymouth Hope Festival has been the official launch of Refugee Week in the city. It has been a testimony when we talk about Refugee Week, the contribution of refugees in the UK. So that has been, it has had an impact in the city, and we will carry on doing that. So Plymouth Hope, we started in 2008. Like I said, we wanted to tackle isolation and loneliness among asylum-seeking populations. And of course, there's no shame to say that asylum seekers quite often, because of many barriers, they are not occupied. So one of the reasons was to keep people occupied. And of course, improve physical well-being and give people regular activities. So our first session, following, obviously, we can go through how to set up a project and all of that. I've already seen a question from people who want to set up similar project. That's why we're here. We can share expertise after that. So after a lot of work, we started our first session really has a kickabout, and we have the number 54. 54 was the number of people we had for our first session in 2008, end of 2008. And of course, we had different nationalities, people from different social backgrounds, cultures, and of course, people from the local community, which was a surprise to people like myself and other asylum seekers around. And of course, what we had in common is that there's also poverty among local communities, people with barriers to access free football. So that was really a starting point to what is now an organization, because then we realized, oh, actually what we're doing here could be something great to bring people together and formalize these activities to make sure that people are busy. It was also a sign of a resounding will for cohesion, because obviously we had people, not just refugees, asylum seekers, international students, but specifically locals. And yes, it was always need-led, always led by asylum seekers ourselves who were in the city and isolated. Yeah, played a part in picking the name, but colors of the football teams and all of that was a role from people who were playing football. And the name is behind basically us saying we want to achieve, we're hoping to achieve something better for our futures and better opportunities. So after that, in 2009, for those who know football a little bit, we integrated a local football league. For us, it was a way, for the first time, that was the biggest and largest football club, bringing everyone together. Traditionally, there were smaller teams, but has per country of nationality. But this time around, it was everyone among refugees, population, asylum seekers, and locals coming together, one football team, and which still exists. Oh, sorry. How do I go back? Sorry, my IT skills here. Apologies. Right, sorry, there you go. So we've been in the league for about 10 years now. In 2010, we started the football festival that I just mentioned earlier. The aim was to really embed our cohesion goals, because it was just now transforming the power of football into communities, bringing people together. So we started this festival by bringing everyone together, including people from the refugees and asylum seeker sectors, schools, local teams, statutory sectors, and all of that. Everyone around a tournament that started in 2010. And as we progressed, it became the following year, the official launch of Refugee Week in the city. And obviously, as you can see, it was an opportunity to celebrate diversity, of course, celebrate home countries. Yes, we were all part of one football team, but that was a time where everyone was looking forward to celebrate and be proud of their home countries. And it was also an opportunity for cohesion. And in 2018, this event became the largest multicultural event in the city. It was a right testimony to say that it was working, bringing people, asylum seekers, refugees, and the local communities together. And it was, and until now, it has been the biggest tool in terms of awareness raising, because printing thousands of leaflets, having 10,000 followers on Facebook with the name on there, launch of Refugee Week. Following that, people will follow up, oh, what is that? You know, you have a lot of local teams who've never heard about an asylum seeker, but by just seeing the word Refugee Week, they will follow up and say, can you talk to some more about this? Then we follow up with workshops and all of that. So it was and it has been the biggest thing really in terms of raising awareness. And it was, of course, a mixture of different sports activities, art, music, and community groups. So one essential things I will mention, time is taking, is that why are we use football for this event? Because as you can see, even if you don't know football, when we started, it was first adult. So when you have an adult who comes attend an event, they hold the event, that's an opportunity to bring children, if you're a family person, to bring wives, friends, and family. And if you're a local football team or a club or schools who were entering, because has it progressed from 5 teams during the first festival, the last one we had 54 teams who entered from adult, youth, female tournaments. We run all of it. And for those teams and clubs coming, obviously they were bringing their networks together. They were bringing friends who are linked to those clubs and teams and schools. And for young people, of course, who were also playing in the tournament, they will bring families, of course. As a young lad, you will have to bring your parents around, and parents will also bring in their networks. So this is how football has been used as a powerful tool to bring people together naturally, who just came to support football, but at the same time, they started taking part in other activities. They started taking part in Refugee Week quiz, finding more about it. So this is how really this festival has been very, very effective in terms of really showing the power of refugees' contribution in the city. And of course, we can give different examples for people who want to set up similar things. How long do I have? Let me know. So the rest really is what Hope has become. From a kickabout session, we became a formal charity in 2012. And these are some of the examples of the project we've run, all of them. One example is Sport for Integration, where we work with other refugee sector partners to make sure that whenever there is an asylum seeker who's dispersed in the city, within 48 hours, we have someone who will meet them to make sure they are immediately active. It doesn't matter if you like football or any other activities, we will make sure you are active. And ultimately what happens, you're making friends, you are not isolated, loneliness is not an issue, you meet people from your home country as well as people from other countries. And of course, all these other projects that we were running before COVID. We started Sport for Education as part of our youth programs, offering homework support and all of that. But the key thing was the entry point was always through football or other sports, but mainly football, because people will come in, enjoy football, and then we take them to benefit from other bits. So of course, we can have time to talk about other projects more extensively, but just as an example. Since COVID, this is an example of what we've done. Obviously, we've all seen the news, how, for example, BME populations have been impacted. So we've changed a little bit our narratives, and now we're talking about well-being, which is pretty much the same thing. But we've now taken care in terms of looking at women specifically. For example, we were the first one in the city to run women-only sessions for all sports, for example. And now we're also looking at volunteering, still looking within sport, and to expand that. So this is what we've been doing. As the next steps, really, just to mention, despite the COVID, we still ran a virtual festival last year, and I think we're still 50-50 so far, whether we could have run a physical event or a virtual. But again, if you want to run a similar event, we're more than happy to share the learning with you. One of the biggest projects we've run since COVID, as a small organization working with other partners, we managed to install connectivity Wi-Fi in 79 asylum seekers accommodation. And again, the idea was, hang on a minute, we worked so far to tackle loneliness and isolation. We could not be bystander and let people be isolated and lonely in the asylum seeking accommodations. So we run a pilot for 6 months. And luckily, we've managed now to raise enough funding to keep internet in those accommodations for another year. But again, it was a testimony of how we've managed to bring the whole sector within refugees and asylum seekers together. And it would be brilliant to have all of this happening for the next 12 months, so they would not be isolated. So the key thing for us is, yes, we set up all this to tackle isolation and loneliness. We will keep doing it. We do exercise online and all of that. And of course, we're writing tools now in terms of how football could be used. So that's that. I think my time may be up. I will allow questions. Sorry if I've gone over a little bit. Very, very challenging to summarize 11 years of work in 5-10 minute presentation. But we'll have time to share a bit more during workshops. Any questions?
David, could I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
About the extent to which you've connected with or worked directly with the football authorities and indeed professional clubs, or indeed kind of amateur. Has that been part of your picture? And how have those relationships been?
Of course, when we started, remember I said we formalized a football club into a league. So now that's been part of a national FA, because every sport has a national governing body. So we became ultimately a member of the local Devon FA, which is the local representatives of the football, the FA pretty much. So since then, we've been working in close partnership with them. So they deliver most of the trainings. They send referees to our matches, and they're also an active part of the football festival that we run. And as we speak, we also have a local partnership with the local professional club, Plymouth Hope. And in fact, we've been doing an educational program during COVID in schools, working with them, where we talk a lot about diversity, refugee work, and all of that. So the answer is yes, it has been part of our work.
I wonder, David, just on a very practical level, if you could share with us what was possible. Obviously, we don't know what's going to be possible and when, but what was possible when things opened up a little bit last summer in terms of football.
Yes, after the first lockdown, we ran about four football specific activities, because obviously people wanted to get out there. Yeah, it was possible, but a bit challenging and tricky because we had specific rules. The FA, National FA sent rules around how to run football trainings and all of that. So it was a bit challenging to implement those rules when people had just come out of the lockdown, they were missing each other and all of that. But it was possible to run some activities and sessions, some of them indoors, but we had to make sure all the COVID-related health and safety rules were applied properly. And there are plenty of guidance from the FA, and more than happy to share with anyone who may want to run similar activities, because I believe those rules will still apply, even if you come out of the lockdown for quite a few months, and maybe for the remainder of the year.
Great. Well, people can always, if there are further comments or questions as we go, please add them. David, do you want to move on and introduce our next speaker?
Yes, brilliant. I think our next speaker is Bilal from Football Welcome, run by Amnesty International. So Bilal, over to you.
Yes, thank you, David. So, hi everyone, my name is Bilal. I'm the project manager for Football Welcomes, the Football Welcomes month. I won't be speaking for too long. All I wanted to do really was give you a bit of an introduction to the campaign and sort of leave you with where we are and where you can get involved. So essentially, Football Welcomes came out of our I Welcomes campaign and initiative. And what I Welcomes was an effort to to think about an international response to the refugees crisis that happened many years ago and is still ongoing now. And it came from an understanding that we are largely in a moment in time where we are losing the wider debate around refugees and asylum seekers. And this is sort of compounded by for sort of like really authoritarian governments all over the world, not least in America, that make refugees and asylum seekers the enemy. And like we can see this by sort of like the Mexican initiative in the United States, where they asked everyone who was claiming asylum in the United States to stay in Mexico. And what that did was created camps where there was atrocious conditions well before COVID kicked in. And now with COVID kicking in, it's been compounded by a virus. And obviously we can see this with sort of all of the camps in Calais. And what we realized was we can do a lot of the traditional lobbying, and we can talk to the base of people who really care and are passionate about refugee issues as well. But really what we need to do is we need to expand that base and sort of bring refugee stories to light in many different ways. And one of the ways that we wanted to do that was through football, right? Football is quite literally the nation's sport. It is the most watched sport, the most participated in sport, the most played sport. Like in terms of sport in the UK, it's football, and we wanted to sort of harness the power to sort of spread the good, sort of the good and empowering stories of refugees in the UK. And so we used to have a weekend now, and now it's a month. So in April, football welcome month comes about, and essentially the reason why it's in April is to commemorate the anniversary of the first footballing refugees that came to the country, fleeing the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. And it started with just trying to sort of share their stories and sort of think about what made their stories wonderful. And so we worked with the 10 clubs where they played. And in the first year, there were 10 clubs. Now you fast forward 5 years, understanding that it didn't happen last year. So I'm talking about 2 years ago, that over 170 clubs from sort of the Premier League, the Championship, all tiers of English football, as well as the women's leagues, and now in Wales are participating. And all of them in some way, shape or form try and spread the stories of refugees and asylum seekers in the beautiful game. Whereas this year we want to sort of take the onus off those stories and put the onus onto fans. So to think about what it looks like to sort of say to fans that the onus is on us as established communities to foster welcoming communities rather than on the refugee and asylum seeker to integrate. And so we're going to be working with sort of more players, hopefully, although COVID is quite annoying, to sort of think about what it looks like for homegrown players in both the men's and women's sport to sort of really grapple with why it is that their cities are welcoming to them, but they're not welcoming to refugees and asylum seekers. This is also part of a wider campaign where we want to do sort of more grassroots work with refugees and asylum seekers, and we want to do way more in the women's game, because one sort of particular niche in football is that though male refugees and asylum seekers feel like it's something that they can participate in, we wanted women refugees and asylum seekers to feel like it was something that they can participate in as well. So we struck a partnership with the English FA, where they would fund a post for a women's support officer that would specifically look into increasing the participation of female refugees and asylum seekers in the sport. And we also set up a grassroots community project, so Football Welcomes community project and I always forget one. So if I do, and any of them are on the call, I'm really sorry, but I want to say with Liverpool County FA, with Doncaster, with Middlesbrough, with Aston Villa, and Leicester. There you go. I haven't forgotten one. So with those teams, we fund year-long programs around sort of particular footballing initiatives with refugees and asylum seekers, and then sort of separate footballing initiatives with refugees and asylum seeking women, where they started playing football and they started sort of putting on tournaments with sort of players and established communities, and have now snowballed into sort of offering English classes and sort of going to them for advice on sort of systems analysis. So like understanding the systems of the country and understanding how paperwork works and how they can just navigate the systems of the country. And I think that shows the power of football, because you can use football as a medium to spiral into many other things. And that's basically what we've done with Football Welcomes. And I just want to leave with this. Look, those community projects are sort of like the gold standard for us, because we really want to encourage them as far and wide as possible. So if you can see sort of any opportunity in your local area with your local football club to do that kind of work, please do get in contact with me. I'll put my email in the chat. And I think I'm opening up for any questions, so I'll hand back over.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Bilal. Any questions from Bilal? I have a few questions in the chat box I will be answering later on, but for now, if there are any questions for Bilal. Good. So Bilal, maybe I'm not sure if you've said the right, for people who may want to. Plymouth Hope, I think, hosted some events, and he has been brilliant having those T-shirts at our festival. How easy is the process really to be part of to host some of these events? Really, maybe in a nutshell, quickly.
Yeah, it's very easy. So essentially, when someone gets in contact with us, we try and sort of find out who their local or their most local participating partner is. If they're too far, then we encourage them and we help them to get in contact with their nearest football team. And then once we have those that dialogue open, then we try and either think about other areas. So we have. So Amnesty has about 170 local groups up and down the country. So it's about getting them in contact with their local group and sort of seeing if we can facilitate a relationship between refugee organizations and football clubs, so that we can start something in those areas. So relatively easy. I'm going to put my email into the chat. Please do send me an email and tell me where you're from, and we'll see if we've got a participating football club. If not, we can get something going by sort of introducing you to your Amnesty local group.
Good, brilliant.
So you'll be looking to hear from Bilal, or like local organisations that are working with refugees and asylum seekers?
Yeah, so anyone who's currently working with refugees and asylum seekers, anyone who isn't but wants to, anyone who currently working with a football club, or anyone who isn't but wants to. Really, it's that sort of like, do you have established relationships? If not, do you have a will to do something? And if you do, then we can do something from there.
Good, good, brilliant. I will try and Bilal, do you have a contact? I think Bilal, you have a question around here. If you have a contact, Aston Villa. Someone is asking from Refugee Action.
Hi, Julie. Yeah, we do. We speak to the head of the community project at Aston Villa. I think his name's Pete Ezard. So yeah, I mean, send me an email. I'm happy to do some sort of intro.
Yeah. We also have a question for myself, maybe that may be of interest to everyone. Just before we introduce our next speaker, I think someone from the Big Leaf Foundation, I believe, is asking for any advice for charities working with young asylum seekers and refugees about starting a football session, and also interested in how to ensure young people are active in decision making. So I think Plymouth Hope, I can just give our example. What has been really, really useful for us since we started is consistency. Obviously, when sessions start and all of that. So, and I think I will give a simple example. We've always had, for example, an attendance list. And for all our 11 years, it is really, really difficult to not to give a phone call to someone who has missed sessions more than 5 times. So that consistency among asylum seeking populations, it shows that you care. It's not just saying, yeah, we care about you, but having those actions being done are really, really important. It gives more value. And I think it's also been connected to refer young people you're working with, or it may be adult, with other organizations and agencies. Because what we've learned as a football coach, or you build relationship and you build ultimately trust with people. So what will happen with that is you become more aware of their issues, their challenges and all of that. So even if you are not an advice agency, for example, we don't provide advice, but you cannot ignore someone who comes and says, I have an issue with the Home Office and XYZ. So this is where your connections will come into play. So by you sharing that you care, you have an ear to listen, in a way, you are making them a central point of all of your projects. They buy into it, they take ownership in what you're doing. Then the practical bit that will happen when you want to run focus groups, for example, which is what we've always used to make sure that we review all our projects. We've never gone more than 2 months without having, for example, focus groups, which is in large part serve people themselves who are attending the sessions, facilitated. We always hear about how sessions are going, if they want to change anything. And of course, they are always popular because we always care. The same way, for example, we are not an IT company or anything like that, but because we noticed that lack of connectivity was an issue for many people, we took the lead and said, hang on a minute, we're not playing football for now, but we do care about your isolation and all of that. So all those things, shows value to people, and ultimately you have them at the center of your project. So these are some of the tips that we've been using. Challenging because it has to be consistent, but I hope that helps. But always happy to, I'll write my email here as well, or through Emily and Tom, you can get in touch. So yeah. Should we pass on to our next speaker now? If there are no questions, we'll pass on to Matt at GoldClick, who will again tell us more about their work.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, a quick presentation. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew. I'm the founder of GoldClick. We're definitely zooming out to go a little bit more global for my presentation. So GoldClick is a global football storytelling organisation. What does that actually mean? It means we find people from all around the world and we ask them to tell their own stories about their lives and their football communities. We do this by really giving them the platform, the power, the freedom, the control to tell their own story about their lives, the football communities they're in and their teams. All of this in order to make it feel as though it's more of an insider view into their worlds more than an outsider view of someone coming in and telling their story. So ultimately our aim is to help people understand one another and the world through the common language of football. We work across many different parts of the world in about 150 countries and right the way across the spectrum from refugee communities right up to the elite of global football. And what we do is we provide everyone initially with a disposable analog camera, so 27 photos on a roll of film, and then they also write their own stories alongside those photos. Before I go specifically into the kind of refugee work that we're doing, it's worth kind of illustrating some of the stories that we've got back from around the world. Our very first ever story was from Sierra Leone and the National Amputee Football Association in Freetown. Another very early, one of our most recent stories came from the Pakistani mountains of Gilgit-Baltistan and a girls' football league in that area. And then it's not just grassroots. We obviously work in the elite game as well. And this was taken from our Women's World Cup project with the US women's national team. But where it's most relevant to today, obviously, is the work that we're doing with refugee communities around the world. And for the last few years, we've been growing a new project as part of GoldClick called GoldClick Refugees. Also, refugees is a very broad word, and this would include anyone who is a person of concern, from refugees and asylum seekers to unaccompanied minors and internally displaced persons. We've teamed up with the UNHCR, and I think Matt and Sarah are both on this call as well. And ultimately, we are finding refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people from all around the world in refugee camps, in new host communities, or even attempting to make it as professional footballers. And we are giving them that chance to tell their own story through the GoldClick project. We launched the project last June, just before World Refugee Day and Refugee Week. And the initial launch featured 30 people, male and female, from all across the world, telling their stories through their amazing photography and the powerful words that they have alongside those photos. I'll run you through a few examples of some of the stories and some of the photos, but this is very much an ongoing project, and we are currently expanding into many, many more countries, and we hope that by this June we will have hit around 60 to 70 people as part of the project, and maybe by 2022 we're into 3 figures. So the call out obviously is, if you believe the organisation or anyone you know has a powerful story to tell through football, we would love to hear from you. A quick run through of some of the stories. This is personally one of my favourite photos from a Palestinian community in Jordan. We worked very extensively in refugee camps in Jordan, particularly in Zaatari and also Azraq, where we had young boys and young girls documenting their lives in the camp. I was hoping that Positive Youth Foundation might be on this call. I'm not sure if they are. We worked with a number of organisations in the UK, in Liverpool, in Coventry, in Birmingham, and we're also working with Amnesty around their Football Welcomes campaign, focusing on women. And then not all our stories obviously come from camps or host communities in the Middle East. We have stories from as far afield as Australia and the United States of America, and Austria. And I'll leave on a couple of quotes from some of the young girls who are part of our project, because I think that ultimately their words are far more powerful than mine. We are merely a platform for them to tell their own truths. And something that I am continually inspired by is particularly the young females who are part of our project, and the kind of courage and resilience that they demonstrate in order to even get on a field. Because in every single country around the world, in almost every single socioeconomic group, it is harder for a girl or a woman to play football than a man. And yeah, through our project with the UNHCR, we are trying to provide the space for refugee voices to tell their stories through football. And yeah, you can follow the continued exploits of GoldClick and the UNHCR on Instagram, Twitter, on our website, and I'll also put in the website for the UNHCR landing page. And yeah, please do get in touch if you would like to collaborate or know more.
Good, brilliant. Great, fantastic. Any questions for Matt? Thank you for this presentation.
We've got a very attentive audience today. They're just calmly absorbing all the knowledge.
Yeah, I was just sat here wondering, I should have brought a football and send everyone a football and then start doing some skills to get them active and all that. Right, okay. Well, I think we're still around. Let's see. What's going on in my head? Sorry, silence. Okay, no, that's fine. We're still around. Hopefully, if you have, we'll have time if you have any questions and all of that. So, okay, you have a question from Alison, Matt? Do you see it's, yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite questions, Alison, thank you. So Look, obviously the world is digital, and you know, we all take advantage of digital technology, and there is something amazing about the ability to have a camera in all of our hands all around the world. The reason why we use analog disposable cameras is for three reasons. The first reason is equality. Obviously, by giving everyone the same tool, there is a level of equality between an elite footballer and a child in Zatari camp. And you're therefore not dependent on the quality of technology that you have in your hand. The second reason, which is probably the main reason why we use them, is to encourage patience, intentionality, and the deliberate nature of the photo taking, because scarcity is something that we're not used to these days in this world. We often take thousands of photos and never look at them again. Something about having just 27 photos, we think, focuses the mind and actually raises the quality of the stories. And the last element is, I guess, the uniqueness of using a disposable in today's world. The aesthetic that it produces, they're actually pretty popular, even with people who haven't really used one before. So whilst it might be quite easy just to get a crowdsourced picture of the world, I think what we're trying to do is go a bit deeper and a bit more, work with these people more long term in order to kind of bring their stories out. And by and large, we find a way. Obviously, it's also much better for the environment than people flying into countries to document stories of people. We have never travelled anywhere as part of the project. And in answer to your other question, we pay for everything. The only thing that our participants have to do is somehow make sure the camera comes back to us by hook or by crook. But yeah, we supply the cameras, we develop everything, and we ultimately you know, tell their story. So yeah, that's why we use those cameras. Do we give them an idea of how to tell the story and what format? So it's a fine line, I would say. So what we try and do is we try and give people as much space as possible to tell their story and not micromanage. But there are certain practical guidelines we can give them and inspiration, often based on what other people have done within the project, to guide them in a certain direction. But ultimately, the way we get different photos told from diverse viewpoints is to not really tell people what to do. It's really giving them that freedom to tell their own story. And we're constantly surprised with how different photos look from different communities and different parts of the world. But yeah, there's probably some practical guidance we give them about how best to use a camera like that and kind of draw out their story and their energy. Thank you for all your questions. Yes, people in the everyone really has woken up. This is great. People in the UK absolutely can get involved. In the first wave of stories, we worked with the British Red Cross in Birmingham, with Positive Youth Foundation in Coventry, and with Middlesbrough Foundation and the Liverpool FA in the north of England. So yes, we're absolutely open to UK participants. We are actively seeking people to take part, whether they are trying football for the first time, whether they're male or female, whether they're on coaching courses. The only criteria is that they have a background that we would loosely define under refugees, but would ultimately fall under a person of concern from a global UNHCR definition. So yes, please do get in touch. Are we still working with people in Coventry? Not right this second, but I imagine we will do again. So you know, Coventry has a lot of great things going on, and yeah, please, keen to hear more about how we can work more in Coventry. Wow, I'm just going through the questions, David, if that's all right. So collaborate with people from could we collaborate with people from other areas, such as performing arts, to find ways of telling their story, from dance, etc. A very interesting question. The next step with GoldClick is most likely into other sports. So not just football, even though football does play an outsized role in life and humanity. I have always said that this would work equally well in dance or music or other artistic pursuits. I think that whilst we will probably predominantly focus on sport and specifically football at the moment, I can absolutely see this as a means of bringing these stories to life in other fields. So happy to have a chat. Well, you are quite right. Dance is a sport. So I stand corrected. We should definitely have a chat about that outside of this conversation, because yeah, we are starting to explore the likes of boxing and skateboarding and rugby. So I don't see why dance shouldn't be next.
Brilliant.
I think there's a few more people typing. How has COVID affected the project if people aren't playing football? An excellent question. So I think one thing we found is that not all COVID is created equally in this world, and that there are, while some countries have had total shutdown of football, there are other places that haven't. And a lot of our stories have continued to come out of places where either restrictions are looser or COVID levels are a lot smaller. Clearly, the UK, it's been very tough to work in the last 6 months, but thankfully our global outlook means that most things are still creaking on. Definitely the first 3 months of the pandemic were very limited in terms of how many people were telling stories, but now we've kind of bounced back to almost where we were beforehand. And ultimately, you only need 2 or 3 people playing in a session for a GoldClick story to be told. You know, as you can see from our work, some of the most powerful stories come from very small communities. It doesn't need mass crowds in order to make a story. So we're confident that as long as there are even 2 people kicking a football to each other, you can tell a good GoldClick story. How do we decide who to send the cameras to? That is, sorry for monopolizing this conversation, everybody. How do we decide who to send the cameras to? It's a mixed approach. So GoldClick is always going to be a crowdsourced project in the sense that people can apply and be part of it if they have a compelling story. People usually do if they take the time to apply to GoldClick. But increasingly, we also have a more proactive approach where we work with lots of NGOs, charities, activists, to kind of work with them to find the right kind of storytellers. So the Refugees project that we are running with the UNHCR, we're working with around 25 country offices from the UNHCR, as well as many other NGOs and sports for development organisations on the ground across the world, who then kind of guide who might be the best people to do the project. So it's a bit of everything. There's a bit of journalistic nose of, you know, maybe what makes a good story and hunting one down, but then we also work very closely with implementation partners on the ground to find great stories. And you know, Amnesty is a very close partner. We're working with the 5 clubs that Bilal mentioned, and they are nominating refugees in order to take part in that project as well. So yeah, it's kind of, you work on both sides to find the right storytellers.
Good.
Thank you for your excellent questions, everybody. And hopefully that was informative. And yeah, if there are any other things that people would like to know, please do get in touch. Always happy to have conversations in this field particularly.
Good. Brilliant. Okay. So yeah, feel free to add more questions, and I'm sure Matt, this will add on to your busier week and doing all the follow-ups and all that. That's great. Absolutely.
That's what we live for. That's what we live for. There's no point doing anything if there's not collaboration. So absolutely.
Brilliant. So I think it's time for our next round, which are the breakout room. I think we've got just about half an hour. Is that right, Emily?